Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hope if you're watching this in the middle of the night, that it gives you something worthwhile to do in difficult hours. Those are times, all times that I've worked and all times that I've slept in my lifetime. I'm Frank Watson, and this is KaPOOF. What does that mean? KaPOOF is a video that's done on Zoom. And I'm an old guy that does it. I use the free Zoom app, and I like to play with digital toys. I'm concerned that sometimes at 81 years old, I have to learn a toy and kind of stick with it. The digital world is kind of a new frontier to me, and I think it behooves me to realize that as an elder, I need to be careful about my engagement in new technology. Uh, I don't drive a car anymore, and when I ride with people who are driving these newer cars, I look at the instrument panel and I think hanging up those keys was a good idea. And there are keys that I probably should be constantly evaluating that I use today and say, is this a good choice for me at 81 years old? And in a year's time, I should reevaluate maybe some of the choices daily. There things develop so quickly that oftentimes it's impossible to protect consumers from scammers and thieves and thugs on the internet. And so, having been around the block, or at least 3/4 of the way, I've learned to be cautious about exposure. But I like to play, and I enjoy my digital toys, and I like to communicate with people, and I like to help others communicate. For my age group, I'm considered fairly advanced in the use of such things as Facebook and YouTube and Zoom. For younger people, not so much. So for younger people, I I want to suggest that there might be something here for you in passing if you just want to hang in there. Now, if you want to connect with me and join me on one of my Zooms, my KaPOOF, you can reach me at 1515frank@gmail.com. And we will discuss what it is that you want to do and what it is that I want to do, and see if we can agree on sharing a KaPOOF. What is a KaPOOF? Well, KaPOOF started out as simply poof on the free version of Zoom. Now, the free version of Zoom, there's some resources available there, more than I use, because I like to keep it simple. There used to be a thing called KISS, an acronym called Keep It Simple, Stupid, that I'm sure has a history that could be expanded upon and expounded upon. But it was a sales tool, among other things, and a kind of a mantra. And I think that there are some things that require gifts and training and complex comprehension of complexity. But let me give you an example. Playing music. I play a couple of stringed instruments and harmonica. I don't play them great. I'm not a master performer. I tell stories. I enjoy recounting the stories of my own past or stories that others have told me, and uh, I also review a lot of social media, including videos. I'm fascinated by some of the teachers in spiritual growth, and I comment on some of that. I comment on scripture, and I pray. And in all of that, I follow a kind of a philosophy of I'm seeking my optimum potential. Now, my optimum potential here would be enhanced, I think, if I put a little more light on one side of my face. Let me do that. This is fun if you like it. I'm 81 years old, and sometimes I dance. I don't dance as long as I used to, and I'm not nearly as athletic. That applies to several aspects of my life. So, yeah, we lit me up a little bit there. I hope that's an improvement. Although I must say I looked a little more mysterious the other way, and I'm not sure that this is an improvement, but we're going to go with it. So, optimum potential. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, I don't want to live at my minimum potential. I've got a body, I've got a voice, I've got a brain, I've got two hands, arthritis, yeah, okay. But I can still play a song, I can still wave, I can still pray. Now, I'm learning about all of those things, continue to learn as I make use of the gifts and the gift of my body, the gift of my brain, the gift of my heart. And I'm passionate about learning and growing as a human being. I want to do that right up until the very end of my life. Life is a gift. This time within time and within a body to this is my day at Disneyland, and sometimes the rides are scary, and sometimes they are very demanding. The climbing walls, in particular, uh, but excuse me, if I I don't want to I don't want to necessarily aim for maximum potential either. I could be spending a lot of time preparing myself uh, for making better videos, having a clearer voice, and I probably will do better in the future. This is kind of a early attempt. I've been drinking coffee and not enough water, and that doesn't hydrate me well enough. So, water. I my old friend Michael Priller, who passed recently, once said to me, Frank, if you ever were able to be at your full potential, you would really be something. At the time, I was learning to write songs and live creatively, and I was operating really at a pretty high potential. I was doing things I hadn't had the opportunity to do and really enjoying them. And we laughed about that a lot later on. Mike Michael passed recently. We talked before he passed, and we talked. He had had several near-death experiences, and we talked about those. And I think that he he was sad to leave his friends. He was a really bright and witty and caring person, and he had some friends that were just loves, and he had Benny the Wonder Cat as well that he was reluctant to leave in the garden. But it came time for him to go, and he, I believe, is probably visiting many places, and one of them might be right here and right now. Both the time that I'm making the video and the time that you, whoever you happen to be, might see it. And I suggest that there's a couple of things that might call Michael's presence to you. Uh, Oatmeal cookies, oatmeal raisin, I think, blueberry pie. Those would be two good places to remember Michael, and maybe you have others. And if you do, and you play this, pass this video on, or view it in a format where it can be commented on, please comment, because I loved Michael. He was one of the most fun people to be around that I've ever known. So that's optimum potential evolved out of Michael's comment. So Michael stimulated massive growth in my thinking and my being. And I'm not the only person that happened to. He was one of those people that has that kind of an impact. And the impact I'm sure, continues with other people, that we are better for having known Michael. In my case, I came from a culture that said, well, if you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly. And uh, it was a kind of testosterone infused command uh, to be an extremist. And I'm sure Barry Goldwater would probably approve of that. However, on reflection, I think maybe Barry Goldwater was mistaken when he said extremism in the defense of liberty is not a vice. Or maybe he just, the implication was that it's a virtue. I don't see extremism as a virtue. It may or may not be a vice. In my particular case, uh, it's one thing to be passionate about something, it's another to devote yourself to something without regard for anything else. If you have a gasoline engine and you're running, you put it in a car and you put the car in idle, and you press down on the accelerator and bring the engine to full potential and just hold the gas there, what's going to happen? Number one, you're not going to go very far. And number two, you're not going to be able to go far with that engine in a fairly short order. You're going to blow that engine up. So I'm looking for appropriate use of potential according to what I'm doing and the capabilities, the appropriate capabilities I have to do it safely. I can drive, I could drive still, I believe, at 60 or 70 miles an hour on the interstate. But my vision's not very good. Maybe the interstate is not a good place for me to be as a driver. Do you see where I'm going with this? Where I'm going is each of us has a life path. And I believe that life path is decided on before we even arrive here. There are certain instructions that are encoded in our genes and certain steps that we have to take along the way to our path. Often those steps are presented as obstacles. Sometimes the obstacle may be an attractive pit of quicksand. What am I talking about? Well, for instance, using myself as an example, which is uh, in some ways not a great thing to do, but on the other hand, I can't really tick anybody off other than myself by using myself as an example. I was born in Martinsville, Indiana, and lived up a holler. My first home was up a holler, Holler. You might spell it Holllow, but my family said holler. near Mahaleysville, Indiana. And now this is going to sound kind of, for some people, maybe even romantic. I mean, you can't really make this stuff up. It's this what really happened. My first friend was a dog named Brownie. My first home was a little shack up this holler that we called Watson Holler. Oh, we were proud. My Uncle Leonard had 40 acres, which he farmed with mules. He hadn't had it very long, but we quickly called it Watson Holler. My dad was in the Army in World War II in the Philippines and then in Korea. Up at the head of the holler lived Mrs. Thompson and her daughter Edna. I thought Edna was the most beautiful thing imaginable. She had this black hair, and it was just long and lovely. Mrs. Thompson was an Indian woman. And when they brought me home, I was the first one in my family born in a hospital at Martinsville. And when Mom brought me home, I think Uncle Leonard probably brought her. I don't know. There's things that I don't know about my past because my family only told certain things, and my sister might know more about this than I do. She was a good listener, and Uncle Leonard and Aunt Verna informed her of a lot of things that I didn't really pay attention to. But when they brought me home, Mrs. Thompson came to inspect the baby, little baby Frank Dale. They called me Dale because my dad's name was Frank. And she looked me over and pronounced, "He was marked by the sign of the bull." I would love to know what she meant by that. I was informed of that by my mother, who, according to Ancestry.com, would have qualified for tribal membership of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. Her ancestor, Sarah Polly Skidmore, was in Borden Cove in Tennessee, married another, she was full-blood Cherokee, and married a minister who was, I think, half or three-quarter Cherokee. So how Mrs. Thompson managed to stay on her land, I would like to know that story too. There's lots of stories that I'd like to know, and someday I may get to learn them. I think that I probably will. Because it's my belief that when we pass this veil of tears, challenges as the case may be, tears and laughter, there is another world waiting. It's the world we came from and that we will return to. And time is not a factor in that. When we read Genesis, God created us because he was lonely. I think that's an excellent place to start examining creation, contemplating it, and deciding what you want to believe and what you don't want to believe. And I've been doing that a lot. My life's path has started out with a family that did migrant work. we settled briefly in the holler while Dad was in the Army. And I had a lot of freedom because my mom didn't know anything about raising kids. Fortunately, Uncle Leonard and Aunt Berna were close by, or I might not have made it. My sister, who came along a year and a half later, uh, and I benefited greatly. And I can't say enough about the value of aunts and uncles and neighbors and family friends in helping as extended family in the raising of children. Uh, they present, each of them presents their own positives and negatives, and every parent arrives uh, with their own positives and negatives. My mother arrived as one of a pair of twins who were followed by one younger brother, my Uncle Clyde, and they had no experience. Mother had no experience in raising children. And I'm going to share something with you that, tells you something about that. When Sue was born, she was colicky. This is my sister, Sue. And she would get fussy. Sometimes she'd throw up a little bit. So mother took her to see old Dr. Pat uh, in Morgantown, Pat Murphy. And Pat inspected her, Dr. Murphy, and he says, "How often do you burp her?" And my mother said, "Burp?" Think it over. I had a year and a half to learn how to burp myself. So inner resilience is a kind of a thing that goes deep with me. I also had to learn how to get along with things in the outside world in rural southern Indiana. My sister Sue assures me that I had a experience of playing with black snakes. That there was a well, a covered well, where I would go and pet them. I have a terrible memory of uh, a black snake in the road that I was preparing to pet. I was communing with it and reaching out my hand when my Aunt Verna saw it and came running out of the house with a broom and killed it. I've carried the guilt for that my whole life, and have gone through various stages of grief and denial about that. But I also somehow knew enough to warn my father and this was an early memory. He was mowing grass with a mowing scythe, and I saw a rattlesnake at his feet and called out to him. And he looked down and saw the rattler, which was coiled and in position to strike, and he swung the mowing scythe and cut off its head. That was the first time I saved my father that I know of. and it was from a snake. The second time I saved him from a snake was a copperhead, and he was putting up hay in a barn where we lived in Johnson County later on, one that had been associated with my family for some time that I didn't know anything about. Possibly because my dad, they told stories, but they were very careful what stories they told, and they didn't tell as many stories maybe as some other families did. The family business was moonshining. And I still think that the family got out of the business because they realized I talked too much and it wasn't safe to continue. So he was in a hayloft, and we were sending hay up from the fields. My sister came running and said, Dale, Dale, come quick. Daddy's in the hayloft. There's a copperhead. So I grabbed something, I forget what it was, and went up there, flailed away at the copperhead, and managed to distract it and I think kill it. So that was the second time for a snake that I saved him. I also saved him from choking. Once he got a leaf caught in his throat. We were swimming in a little pool in Indian Creek. That was before it became Lamb Lake. And he got a leaf caught and he was choking. And I dragged him to a sandbar, and I knew enough about how to dislodge stuff from the throat and to do chest compressions, and I did that, and he was okay. The second time was at a little restaurant in Morgantown, and he got some food caught in his throat, and I had learned in school about the Heimlich maneuver and performed that, and he survived that. So these are just all scenes from my childhood. I remember when we left the holler, I got word that Brownie had passed, and I grieved. And Dad said he went out under a tree and died, as old dogs do. Later, in my Uncle Leonard's effects, I saw a letter from the people in Michigan that we worked for picking fruit, telling Leonard about he looked like he was going to have a good crop of peaches, and that he could use Leonard and Mom and Dad and the family picking, and tell Dale that Brownie had a fine litter of puppies. Wait, it took me a while. It took me a couple of years to really absorb that Brownie didn't die under a tree. Brownie wasn't a boy, and that my dad, who insisted on literal truth if I told a lie, it was at the risk of my life. My dad, who loved the truth, lied to keep from hurting me. I think that realization probably helped me forgive an awful lot in him that he needed to be forgiven for, and I needed to forgive. I remember picking fruit. I remember not so much the picking of it. I did help a little bit. They let me pick tomatoes and put them in a Quaker Oats box and carry them to the hamper. I remember picking in Michigan after we had left the holler, which in some ways that was kind of like deep heaven to me. But anyhow, I remember picking cherries and peaches, and I remember mother uh, picking up a peach that was good enough off the ground and spitting on it and rubbing on it to get the DDT off of it, giving it to me. And I remember we were next to a blueberry field, and there's a blueberry loam uh, soil, probably had a lot of peat moss in it, and it's itchy. And the peach fuzz was horribly itchy. And I remember itching and crying. And I think about my poor mother, that young woman who didn't know anything about raising children until she learned it firsthand, having to pick fruit and watch children at the same time. And this was, I can sing stories about rambling round your city, rambling round your town. I pick 'em all for $1, boys, as I go rambling round. Sometimes the peaches get rotten and fall down on the ground. There's a hungry mouth for every peach as I go rambling round. So I was kind of born to be a folk singer in a lot of ways, or a folk storyteller, or just to be a folk. Maybe that's enough. It's a, it's as I look at it, as I look at my life, and I see the things that I've been through, and sometimes glorious at the time, and sometimes horrible. It makes a pretty good story, and it's a better story than I think I could invent. I got a pretty good imagination, I think, but the story I was born to is better than what I can imagine. Maybe I imagined it before. I guess I must have imagined it before I got here. So anyhow, along the way, I've kind of developed this thought that it's okay to just tell my story and help other people tell their stories. And what I try to do in my use of media is to use consumer level, affordable, preferably free media to share pictures and stories and thoughts and videos that I find worthwhile. A lot of humor, a lot of stuff, memes that make you laugh, and I say humor advisedly because uh, comedy, the laughter is usually it usually has a heart of pain, and humor is gentler. Will Rogers was a humorist. I love Will Rogers. I, Will Rogers said, if you're going to give away money, give it to the poor people, because the rich people will have it by evening time, and at least it will have passed through their hands on the way to the rich guy. Now, he didn't talk about rich guys being bad or evil, and he didn't say that poor people were good. He just observed that that's the nature of money. It doesn't trickle down, it trickles up. I think that's gentle. and I like gentle because I've had enough ungentle in my life to suit me. I whistle a little bit sometimes. I got false teeth, and they didn't. It's they don't match up quite the way the originals did. Sometimes I think I'm probably gonna down the line. I'm probably gonna do some take my teeth out. I got about 7 along the bottom here that are still left, and I can probably sing better when I take the teeth out and not whistle in the middle of a word. Uh, so anyhow, moving on. My goal in the use of media is to be human, to to tell my human story and with other humans, and where we don't have to wear the masks that we wear when we go looking for a job, and uh, when we go to church. Uh, I I got a lot to say about going to church and about developing my relationship with God, and and doing that is getting beyond my own mask that I see myself with, and being really honest with with God. And when I'm honest with God, I get to know myself better. And uh, and one way of looking at it, that getting to know myself better is getting to know God better. I thought about those things a lot over time. Sometimes doing the darndest things. I spent a lot of time doing manual labor. I wasn't really good at anything. Some people are gifted builders. My dad wanted me to be a carpenter and tried to teach me, which probably sealed my fate. Any inclination I had to be a carpenter was done in at an early age by Dad's instructional methods. He was one of those guys. If I hit my finger with a hammer trying to drive a nail and hit my finger, slip off the nail and hit my finger, and say something terrible, he'd say, "Now, son, that'll build your pain tolerance." I don't think it did. Maybe it did. It confused me about pain. When they asked me on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? And I don't know how to answer because uh, I, I don't know what they mean when they say it. Uh, there are some pains, some levels of pain that I've been in that were pretty daggone extreme, and some of them having to do with Dad. So I really don't know. I really don't know how to answer. I think they ought to redo that question, really. So learning to do this media thing. I wanted to be a writer and a creative person. I liked art and music, and I admired people who could write well. And I've done a lot of writing over the years. None of it that I really cared to uh, hang out a shingle and call myself a writer. But I have become a writer, and I've become a videographer, a photographer, all of it on a an amateur level. I've never really made money doing it, never tried to. And part of that is out of respect for my family. When I showed an interest in art, I was told that's no way to make a living. And by golly, I haven't. Now, some people say that that could change, and I'll respect their experience and hold out the possibility that something that I write or say will suddenly be accepted by enough people who are willing to pay me to write it and say it, that the heavens will open and money will rain down, and I'll be able to buy a house close to my granddaughter and watch my great grandchildren grow. Wouldn't that be great? They're awesome kids. Now, there's a story there. Those great grandchildren, I had to work to earn the title of grandpa. I married a woman who already had 7 children. This was my second marriage and her second. So I have 2 children, 7 stepchildren. But my step grandchild has claimed me as a grandpa. And hear her say, Grandpa, is just the sweetest thing in the world. When she was little, I knew she was special. She had a computer in the basement of home where she lived. Man, I was watching her one day. She says, "Hey, watch this, Grandpa." And she had a program for dolls, and she would select the clothing she wanted to put on the dolls and hit enter. Now, at the time, it took a while for those old computers to load the changes, and there'd be a little clock, a little hourglass appear, and people would say, "Yeah, it's clocking." Now, there's something for you children, you young people. If you've never seen a computer clock, uh, you're of a younger generation. So anyhow, while it was clocking, it would play music, and she'd dance. So I named her Dances with Computers, and I had yeah, that was just wonderful, and I made up a little song for her, and it was just it's nice normal stuff, and I needed nice normal stuff. My first marriage, I was married young. My wife and I, uh, my first wife and I, just weren't destined to make it all the way down. And she, you know, after we went our separate ways, we both did better, and I'm really happy for her. I and my stepchildren had good stepdads. There's one way of looking at the world that says divorce is a bad thing. I think sometimes it's a good thing. It's not a total good, but it's not a total bad. And some of that depends on how you do it. I've got one of my extended family went through a divorce and did it in the best possible way. It's an example of how to do that. And he and his ex-wife are really good friends, and and their son is comfortable in their company when they're together. It's mom and it's dad, and you know they're okay. That's wonderful. The culture I came from was not generally that easy to get along with. It was kind of an either or culture, and either or thinking is symptomatic of addictive thinking. It's control issues. Either you're in control or you're not in control. You're either on top or if you can't win, you give up. Uh, that comes from a little book called Recovery, a guide for adult children of alcoholics. A book that, in reading that, I felt like I felt like it told my life story. My family not only made the whiskey, they drank quite a bit of it too. So, uh, moving on, no, let me say that I have at times got to spinning so badly that the parking lot was up and I had to hold it to keep it from falling. Sort that one through, and if you've been there, well, God bless you. I hope you left there. And I did. I don't drink anymore. Don't smoke cigarettes. The only drugs I use come from the doctor. I find that's a good way to live. Currently, I'm working on, I want to learn how to pray better. Uh, that's on my mind a lot. And I spend time in prayer every day. I do centering prayer, and that may turn out to be the best possible prayer. It is certainly an excellent way to pray. What you do in centering prayer is you get quiet and invite God to come in to your heart, and then you get quiet and let God do what God wants to do. And being quiet and being in the presence of God alone is transformative. And I need transformation. So I seek that on a regular basis. It's done in a way that is very close to meditation. The difference in it is that it is done with the intent of being in prayer. That may not seem like a big difference, but William James, the Scottish philosopher and psychologist, said every difference must make a difference. And Jesus assured us that if we prayed in his name, that his father would hear and answer. And that's my approach to centering prayer. And God has to hear, God has to be close. God has to be present. And to be in the presence of God, how can you be in the presence of God and not transform, not be affected? I welcome the changes. But then I'm 81 years old. I'm not 80 anymore. I'm not 79 anymore. And I'm not getting any younger. I'm at that point where we think about the end stage and uh, and what happens next. And I want to be as well prepared for what happens next as I can be. And being prepared for what happens next runs in my family on my father's side. On my mother's side, go out there and get all you can get was kind of like the thing there. And uh, on dad's side, it was. Now I mentioned that they made whiskey and that they drank it, but uh, honestly, some of that whiskey was sold to doctors during the Prohibition who needed it for medical purposes, and they made good whiskey. They'd been making whiskey before they came to this country and before the Hamilton introduced the taxes that penalized the small farmers who simply wanted to turn their grain into something that was easier to transport. The taxes were in cash and they had no cash. And they couldn't pay in grain or whiskey. So, best I can figure, looking at my family history, thankyouancestry.com, is that my family was in Pennsylvania during the troubles with the government, the Whiskey Rebellion. So that's it was not considered to be a bad thing until Prohibition. There were issues with the government, and then came Prohibition and the moral condemnation. And I'm thinking that maybe moral condemnation is kind of mixed. I think when we judge, we're assured that by Christian faith that we shouldn't judge. And I'm thinking that's a good reason to follow Christ, because I think he gave us advice on how to live and live better. So anyhow, in doing what I do here, my intention is to have conversations with people, uh, let other people tell about their lives and their thoughts, and particularly friends. I don't drive, don't want to drive, and and I want to stay in touch with my friends. I like having conversations that are meaningful, productive, fun, and I like sharing them. I know folks that are isolated that don't have the ability to use media the way that I do, and some of them I can welcome to join me in my Zoom efforts, and uh, others may just want to listen, watch. That can be pretty boring sometimes, and I think it's okay if a conversation has its ups and downs, including my stories. Some people are going to find deadly boring, and that's okay. That's, what I do is not for everybody. If I was making the maximum use of my potential, every second, every millisecond would be carefully planned and productive. It would be intended to sell something. I really don't have anything to sell other than just here I am, and uh, I'm going to put this on some kind of a social media platform, and you can watch it or not. It's not going to cost me any money, and it's not going to make me any. But it reminds me of what I do at times is like something I saw early on in television, and that was a fellow by the name of Alexander King. Alexander King was an East Coast uh, bohemian, and I identified with that. I was living in Trafalgar when I read his book, "May This House Be Safe from Tigers," and it was one of the turning points in my life. He was a he was a it's my understanding he was probably a heroin addict, uh, but it was or opium or something like that. He did drugs, but he was educated, he was artistic, and he was witty, and he was living a normal life except you know for being artistic and witty and doing drugs and be uh, he had a wife, uh, and there one of the book's name was "May This House Be Safe from Tigers," and he said that he had a friend that always prayed that prayer for any occasion. He prayed it every day, and when Alexander asked him why that particular prayer, he said, "Well, I've been praying that prayer for years, and I have never had my house bothered by tigers. It it's a prayer that works, and I use it." So, uh, and it was that kind of dry wit that appealed to a country boy who was used to farmers whose wit was very dry, and uh, it stuck with me. he told about renting a place in the summer in the country, a house up on a hill, and there was an apple tree, and there was a great big iron kettle, and they decided to make an apple pie in that kettle, and they fixed all the apples off that tree that they could get, and made this, put a fire under it, and the smell of that apple pie on the road would catch people's attention, and they would turn off and drive up the lane to the house, and then they would give them some apple pie. And I just thought that was the greatest story. It's just whimsical, and honestly, I have a I have a great attraction to whimsy. Yeah, I just find it remarkably good, satisfying. I I like the old comic strip Pogo because it was so whimsical. Uh, and if you're not familiar with it, you might want to look it up. Especially look for the statement regarding the uh, troubles with Harold Porch. Maybe someday I will find that and put it on one of the videos, read it to you. So I'm amazed at how long this all goes uh, with uh, with only me talking. Uh, and in fact, I need to take a little break, and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to come back here. And if you need to take a little break, I'm going to be about 5 minutes. And I got hydrated all right. But when I come back, I'm going to explain why I call this KaPOOF. I'm assuming that some of you aren't back from your break yet. So I'm going to give us a couple more minutes before I go into the KaPOOF mode. Hope everybody, I hope whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're having a good day or night or morning or whatever. And if you're on the other side and watching and there is no time, feel free to give me a holler. Cashews. I know. Somebody's going to say Gazoon died. I was at VA yesterday, visiting a plastic surgeon. And after I got out of that appointment, I tried to find myself some water and a little something that didn't have sugar in it. I ended up with sweet tea because I'm not good at negotiating machines. I had to use my credit card, which I don't like. And anyhow, I just had a brain fart. I forget what I was trying to talk about there. Just kill time mostly. So that anybody that had to relieve themselves had sufficient time to do so before I go into the details of KaPOOF. Now, I started this at about 10 o'clock. We should be ending sometime soon. And usually there's a warning that goes up at about 30 minutes that says you have 10 minutes left to record. And I'm not seeing that warning. But here we are, and I'm looking at the stuff along the bottom. There's nothing telling me how long we've been doing this. And I'm getting bored doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you about KaPOOF. Now, probably the only person, there's only a few people that will follow this to its illogical conclusion. Tom Probasco might, John Lowe might, my son Aaron might, Diane Scott might. If there's anybody else that does, let me know, because I'm really interested to know if anyone finds it worthwhile. And I'm not worrying about building a brand or anything like that. I'm just trying to have some practice time that I share, some practice time that I just do what I do and put it out there. And I'll get better at what I'm doing by doing it. And I may get people who are interested enough to want to join me. I could have had a number of people join me today, but my two regular guys, uh, Tom Probasco was going to see a buddy of ours, Chris Webb, who has got some pretty serious lung issues, breathing issues. And he was feeling well enough to visit today, and Tom was going to go see him. John Lowe's, I got to schedule John's time. Tom's a retired librarian and a poet. John Lowe is retired. He has been a jazz musician, an Episcopalian priest, a college professor, and Catholic theologian, is my understanding. 95 years old, and his brain, I think his maximum potential, he's either reaching his maximum potential or his maximum potential is just beyond most of us. Because when John, well, first of all, I'll come back to John. When the free Zoom account reaches its cutoff point, which I think is about 40 minutes, it just cuts off. It's all over, folks. And if you're in mid-sentence, that's how it goes. And you don't know exactly, because you get a warning, you've got 10 minutes left. But when you get down to the last minute, you don't know. It just says less than under a minute. So what we do is we just ignore the warning, and when it stops, it stops. Poof. Well, back to John Lowe. Tom and John and I were sharing a conversation on our poof, and we had missed a couple of times. I have doctor's appointments and stuff that get in the way sometimes, and both Tom and John can have occasional things that call them out, but we'd missed a couple meetings, and John was fired up and ready to go. And so when we were all aboard, he just went into it hard. I think he was talking about Tom Holland, a British guy who talks who wrote a book called Dominion, talking about Christianity and its effect on our culture and European culture, and how our decisions and our way of thinking has been influenced by Christianity, to the point where when we critique Christianity, we do so with the very tools that Christianity gave us: the morals, the context for our value matrix. And John was not wasting any time. He leaned into it hard. And I told him, I said, we're going to have to call this KaPOOF, a kind of a combination between ka, boom, and poof. So I thought about that later, after the recording stops. It takes a while for it to process before you can save it. And I thought about that, and I thought, you know what? I like KaPOOF. Poof is really good. And sometimes I will be on a little bit before Tom and John join me and just kind of be like Alexander King. Back to Alexander King. Alexander King, in the early days of television, did a couple of shows. I don't know if there's any record of those shows or not, but he was on with like his wife, and there was obviously a couple of TV cameras, and he'd walk up and he would look in the lens of the camera, and another, maybe another camera would be watching him do this, and he was just like, examining the tools. Oh, they're, just like I am right now, kind of. Just turn to the camera and talk or talk to his wife. And I was fascinated. I loved his ease and his presence, and the fact that he was. I think if he'd been in a play, he would be breaking the third wall, or I forget, talking to the audience, and I think that that's interesting, especially when you leave it possible for the audience to talk back, and that's what I intend to do. When I post, I will have comments so that people can comment back, and um, I really hope that my son Aaron gets this far, because Aaron does video that's kind of similar, and I he'll be going live on it on Facebook or something, and he'll be working with his setup and the tools, and just seeing how everything works, and that's kind of how I do it, and it's like, yeah, that's my son. um, Currently, Aaron Butcher, he was adopted. Well, he was adopted by his first stepfather, David Morthland, and then he took the name of Butcher with his second stepfather. Both reputable men, and he learned from both of them. But anyhow, my sweetie's up, so my life is going to change here very shortly. Uh, so I have enjoyed seeing what Aaron's doing on the media. Turn that light back on, would you, honey? Or no, leave it off. Leave it off. Go ahead, turn it off. Thank you. So I'm going back into the land of mystery. I'm starting to fade here, as you can see. Barbara's eyesight is much better than mine, and she can see in the dark. I can't see at all. But I that's a little excessive. I It takes me back to a memory of a fellow by the name of Bill Arthur. I'll tell you another story here. Bill Bill was an artist, uh, storyteller, singer. Uh, he had been an EMT guy and an entrepreneur, the son of a Presbyterian minister, one of the smartest men I've ever met, and he could be very kind of devious, a great con man, but he was kind of a con man that he could con you out of something that you really didn't want to give up in a way that kind of made him into like a Gurdjieff. because you needed to give it up, and and he could take it away from you and leave you loving him. Well, he was had this Bill was a big guy, you know, tall and pretty good sized man. And he was married. He had this little woman named Alice. Alice was real slender, real sharp. She had been a waitress in Greenfield, Indiana, and apparently Bill had been living with an Indian woman and sleeping in a tent or something. Um, he said the Indian woman had a kind of a disposition that was kind of risky, and she had stabbed one man and shot another one, and he was starting to feel a little bit uneasy with her. And one day, this guy pulled up on his motorcycle, had Alice on back, and he offered to swap Alice for the Indian woman. And Bill took him up on it. Now, Bill claimed he got a quart of whiskey in the deal, but he also said his dog could beat, whip Pat Webb's dog. Pat Webb said that was not true, that Pat's dog whipped Bill's dog. Now, they never said this in each other's company, but Pat Webb's another story, but he and Bill were frenemies, sort of. But that was how that story went. Uh, at any rate, Alice turned out to have an exceptional talent for painting, and Bill was a painter, among other things. Bill was very gifted. He said that when he was young, his father had set him on the mantle of a fireplace and told him to jump off and he'd catch him. And he jumped, and his dad let him drop and said, "Now let that be a lesson to you." But like a lot of things that Bill said, it was a great story and there was a truth in it. And you had to decide which truth you were concerned about. Same kind of truth my father uh, used when he told me that Brownie had gone off under a tree and died. It was maybe the only truth I could handle at the time. But Bill was a wonderful talker, storyteller. He was living in Greenfield, and he decided he needed to be up in northern Minnesota, little town up there that where you ship out onto the boundary waters. And I think he wanted to be able to get to Canada without a passport. The one thing he wanted to do, Ely, Minnesota. And Bill was known all over town up there. But he needed to get up there. At the time, I was driving, working for a guy named Chris Dad, and doing some stuff I really wasn't good at, which is mostly what I did for my whole life. I did stuff that I wasn't good at because I needed some money, and uh, I I didn't want to do the things that I loved for money. And besides, my family had already told me that you can't make a living doing art. So I didn't. So anyhow, uh, Bill what I did for Chris Dad's is I helped him build slot car tracks for these little electric uh, race cars. And I wasn't good at that, but I got pretty good at putting the electric braid on them. And I got so that I could take them up huge, huge, big tracks. They were built in sections. And Chris Dad's was a craftsman and an engineer and an artist. He made the most beautiful slot car tracks you can imagine. And you would race these little electric cars on. And they had braid. They had a slot, and on either side of the slot, on their lane around the track, you had pieces of braid for the electrical connection. I got pretty good at laying that braid, and I could take the things apart, put them back together. It took a crew to do that, and I could drive. So we would load up a 17-foot rider truck, or X-rider usually, with slot car tracks, and then hook up a 20-foot trailer and load that whole rig down with slot car tracks. Chevy 360 engine. And I drove that thing from coast to coast. And there's stories there. You know, Pat Webb and I did a Western tour, courtesy of Chris Dad's slot car track. So anyhow, Bill decided he wanted to go move to Ely, Minnesota. And he asked me if I'd help him move because I had access to that truck. I said, well, I'll check with Chris. Chris said, yeah, you know, it's got a little bit of a radiator leak, but, you know, just make sure to keep the radiator filled. And so I said, okay. So I went out and took the truck out, and Bill showed me what he had. And, you know, he had a bearskin rug he had conned some people out of up in Michigan. And he had lots of different clothes and furniture. He had quite a variety of things, including a full-size dog sled. And you know, after we'd done looking through the apartment, we looked at the garage, and the garage was pretty full. And I said, you know, let me talk to Chris and see if we can use the trailer. So Chris said yes, we could use the trailer. So I went and got the trailer, and we started loading. Man, there was a lot of stuff to load. We got it all, at least all the important stuff, according to Bill. All the stuff that was going anyhow, loaded up, and we took off. And I had to watch the heat gauge, and there was Big Bill and Little Alice. Alice was not really brimming with enthusiasm, and Bill was kind of trying to be cool. You know, he didn't want to disturb the wah, which Bill said that in Japan during the earlier days, that the men's reading rooms had a tradition of silence. It was a special silence called the wah. And if anybody, any of the help disturbed that silence, they were beheaded. Bill was full of that kind of information. Anyhow, Bill didn't want to disturb the wah, and he didn't want to stir Alice up. So we we had a kind of a tense trip, but we made it okay. We got up there. There was a there was a little hunter's cabin, and the cabin obviously hadn't been hunted out of for several years. Alice found a broom and swept it out. We started loading stuff into the cabin. And we finally reached the point where the cabin was full. We were all the way up to the ceiling with just enough room for me and Alice and Bill and the dog to all find places to lay down for the night. And then we finished loading stuff into the driveway. And as we got ready to lay down and sleep, Alice looked around. She looked at the pathway. She looked at Bill. She looked at me. She looked at Bill. She looked up. She looked down, and she started in on Bill. This is not what you said it was. This does not. And Bill stood there and waited, looked up at the ceiling until she ran out of breath. And when she ran out of breath, he said, "Now, Alice, I'll admit that I have been known to gild the lily." And Alice looked at him with a mixture of amazement and, I think, a recognition that Bill was a great man. And started laughing. And when she started laughing, we joined in. I left the next morning with a lot of stuff in that driveway, and I'm sure Bill made some deals, and they kept going, and so did I. And anyhow, uh, I'm past the time that I should have been allotted for this, so I'm going to explain. I'm going to demonstrate the kaboom potential of this, and I hope that somewhere in the middle of all this,